Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Hey, former from Evo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Visa Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as it is the Ivy League Conference Preview Edition. We're going to be joined by the same man that joined me last year for this fine conference preview, Sam Federman, who does such great work over at Mid-Major Madness. I know that he is putting in that work all 12 months out of the year, taking a look at college basketball. We're going to get him on for the Metro Atlantic Conference Preview Edition as well. That'll probably be coming up within the next week or so as well. So you're going to be getting a lot of Sam on this podcast. He also does a few podcasts of his own as well. We're going to be looking at all 8 of these Ivy League teams. We actually have some coaching changes this offseason as well. For Sam, he also does a great job with the Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Sealers podcast. That's one that I was trying to think of. So he's going to be joining me in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, we're going to take a look at the betting trends and the overall styles of play that we've got out here in the Ivy League. And then in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys my projector or finish for this fine conference. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letter Sam, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. 100% of gambling-related transactions always get approved. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll give you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's get down to business and let's take a look at a Ivy League that is very shock, surprise, analytically driven. The smart kids are doing smart kid things this is a conference that has very much embraced the new analytics of college basketball. Lots of teams just absolutely bombing it from 3. Obviously, Princeton, chief among them. Among Princeton's field goal attempts, 48.7% of them came from 3-point range. That was the number 12 mark out there in all of college basketball. So they were a team that very much was not shy of being able to put it up. Now, I will say this. You've got a lot of teams that weren't necessarily in the top 50 with regards to percentage of shots that came from 3-point range. As a matter of fact, Yale was very much looking to go down low. 333rd in all of college basketball in terms of percentage of their shots that came from 3-point range, but we know that Cornell is going to light it up. 13th in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that come from 3-point range. For Dartmouth, they were going through a little bit of a change as well with regards to their offensive style. They were 36th in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that came from 3-point range, and that was a big one for them as well. Columbia, when they had Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa out there, it was going well for them. They were more of an average team at about 172nd, and for Harvard, they were looking to find their bearings last year about 160th, but there were certainly a lot of teams that they were willing to light it up and put it up from 3-point range, and you saw some pretty efficient offense out in this conference with Yale being really your main offensive dynamo. How about 14th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis? Dartmouth took massive strides forward. I recognize that 241st in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis doesn't sound too impressive, but you look at where Dartmouth was the previous year. They were in the bottom 10 in all of college basketball, so they were really able to turn over a new leaf. They did a nice job in terms of being able to be quite a bit more efficient. Now, Harvard was 281st in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. That was obviously obviously a little bit of an issue, and you can tell that Princeton wasn't necessarily the same team that they have been in past years, about 166th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. But you've got a lot of teams in this conference that they really don't push the issue. They're really not going to be teams that generate a bunch of turnovers or anything like that. So you get a lot of clean flowing possessions, and you can see that in the way that these teams just don't generate turnovers. Now, Fran McCaffrey is going to be taking over at Penn, but Penn is going to be one of those teams that's not going to be generating a lot of turnovers. 352nd in all of college basketball. So Iowa was never really one of those teams that was getting out there and just trying to make havoc on the defensive side of things with regards to generating turnovers. Dartmouth was 344th in the country in terms of turnovers force on a per possession basis. Yale, the team that represented in the NCAA tournament, they were in the top 250, but it's not like they were generating a bunch of turnovers. Cornell was 302nd in all of college basketball, so it's a little bit more of a make it or take it sort of league where you've got a lot of three-point shooting that's going to be going down. As a matter of fact, Yale, who I just mentioned, 256th in the country with regards to turnovers force on a per possession basis, so it'll be interesting to see if there's a team that tries to break the mold from a season ago. And for Columbia, 363rd in the country in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage, and a lot of teams that were relatively rough with that regard, as you don't necessarily have a lot of teams outside of Cornell that absolutely look to gun it. Now, you have had some of these teams speed it up just a little bit, like Princeton, year in and year out. They're typically one of the slower teams that you're going to find in all of college basketball, but a season ago, more around 222nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Recognize that they're not necessarily a blazer, but certainly going a little bit more quick. Dartmouth was 34th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. They experienced a massive tempo change with Cornell. They just have that system to where they're looking to get a bunch of possessions up. 35th in terms of total possessions per game. Columbia, 54th in terms of total possessions per game. Yale, more of a mid-tempo team last year, about 164th in the country with that regard. And I mean, they're a team that they go with the personnel that Mr. Coach Jones has, and it always seems to work out very, very well. So you always love to be able to see that. And with Brown, they're one of the more intriguing teams in the conference as well. Typically a mid-tempo team, 186th in the country in terms of total possessions per game a season ago. And if you just take a look at what we got in terms of Ivy League totals, I thought that was very interesting. If you take a look at conference play and conference play only, it was a whole bunch of unders for a lot of these teams, as you had three teams go over with quite a few of their games. Penn was 10 overs to 4 unders with regards to conference games. Cornell, 10 overs to 6 unders, and then Columbia, 8 overs to 6 unders. But Dartmouth, 4 overs to 11 unders. Yale, 5 overs, 10 unders, and a push. Princeton, 5 overs, 9 unders, and a push. You tell that a lot of these teams played much more slowly in conference play, as Brown and Harvard, they both had 6 overs to 8 unders as well. Meanwhile, you take a look at what we got in terms of non-conference play. You had 4 different teams play at least 54.5% of their games to the over. Yale, 10 overs to 3 unders. Cornell, 7 overs, 3 unders, and 2 pushes. Dartmouth, 6 overs, 4 unders, and a push. And then Penn, 6 overs, 5 unders, and 2 pushes. So a lot of these teams that went over in non-conference play, they went under in conference play. So do think that was something that was very much worth noting. And for the Ivy League, they do play a few back-to-backs. They've eliminated some of those, but you get like 2 or 3 of those Friday, Saturday back-to-backs. So that is something that is always very intriguing with the conference. And overall, the bottom teams of the conference had a little bit of a tough time covering. Penn went 11-16 against the spread. Again, Fran McCaffrey going to be coming in. That's going to be interesting. Princeton, 10-19-1 against the spread. Just not the Princeton that we're used to seeing. And then for Columbia, 7-16-2 against the spread. Here's a name that you probably weren't expecting in terms of the top cover team in this conference. Dartmouth. How about 17-9 against the spread? They were so awful the previous year. They burst onto the scene like a house of fire, and they were able to do an absolutely amazing job of making you money. As a matter of fact, 13th in all of college basketball in terms of their overall against the spread record, so they were able to do a really good job with that regard. You had 2 other relatively profitable teams out there in the Ivy League, should come as no shock. Yale 17-11-1 against the spread, and then Cornell 17-11 against the spread. Brown and Harvard, they both went 14-13 against the spread, so pretty even Steven there. And if you take a look at what these teams did outside the conference, you had 3 teams be below 500, 2 teams right at 500 at Cornell and Columbia, and then 3 teams above 500. Yale 8-4-1 against the spread outside the conference. Dartmouth 7-4 against the spread outside the conference. Brown 7-6 against the spread outside the conference, and then your below 500 teams. Harvard was 5-8, Penn was 4-9, and 7-8 for Princeton. And what I think is very interesting is the way that these teams hit the road, because obviously academics come first for a lot of these guys. guys, and you could tell that didn't have a lot of road warriors in the conference. Cornell was 9-4 against the spread on the road. Dartmouth was 9-5 on the road, and Yale 7-5-1 against the spread. Columbia was a dismal 2-10. One of those being an outright win against Villanova. Princeton 2-8-1 against the spread on the road. The other three teams were respectable. Harvard was 7-8 on the road against the spread. Penn and Brown both went 6-7 against the spread on the road. And then if you're just taking a look at the home teams, you had all but three of them be able to be north of 53% against the spread at home, with Yale going 7-3 against the spread at home, Dartmouth 8-3 against the spread at home, Harvard was 7-5, Brown was 8-6, 7-6 for Cornell, and then you had Columbia go 5-6-2 against the spread at home, Penn 5-8 against the spread at home, Princeton 4-9 against the spread at home, and that's a big divide between the favorites and the underdogs, as the favorites actually did quite well in the conference if you weren't Penn and Columbia. Columbia just went straight down the toilet bowl, 4-10-1 against the spread as a favorite. For Princeton, once again, disappointing season, 7-16-1 against the spread as a favorite, and then Penn was 2-6 against the spread as a favorite, but yeah, Cornell handled their business at 11-7 against the spread as a favorite, and Yale 15-9 against the spread as a favorite. So those are some of the betting trends and the styles that we saw in the Ivy League. It's a very, very much league of camaraderie, something that you don't see very often, as for these Ivy League teams, it's very hard for them to be able to bring in transfers, and we're going to be talking about that next and so much more with our good friend Sam Federman. He does great work over at Mid-Major Madness. We're going to be talking about the new coaches in the conference, these rosters, and so much more right here on Cuts Hoops with myself, Greg Gibbs Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, the Ivy League Conference Preview Edition.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. That's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cups with myself, Greg Gibbs Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is the Ivy League Conference Preview Edition, and we had this man on the Ivy League Conference Preview last year, so we had to get him back, as Sam Federman is doing such great work over at Mid-Major Madness, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. He does his own podcast, the Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers podcast as well. He does that with Jonathan Lidskin. They do a great job of, break things down all 12 months out of the year. I know that with Sam, we're going to need to get him back for the Metro Atlantic Conference preview, as he is the MAAC master, as I like to call him. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his first and last name, Sam Federman, with an underscore between the first and last name, and that last name spelled Federman. And Sam, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Greg. Really appreciate it. As we were just saying, it's one of the easier conferences to kind of preview because the turnover compared to the rest of the sport is so little, but there's still a whole bunch of turnover in the conference, some storylines recently, a bunch of coaching changes for the first time in a while. So it's definitely going to be, and obviously there are teams losing players to the portal more so than they have in past years, without really the ability to add every type of player that they might want to add. A really interesting year coming up for the Ivy League. I think every year in every conference is really interesting, but between coaching turnover, not just coaching turnover, but coaching turnover and the new coach not being someone who was on the previous staff, because John Jake last year was the new head coach at Cornell, but he'd been on staff there. This year with Kevin Hovde and Fran McCaffrey, you have two new coaches that were not in the Ivy League over the past few years. Obviously, Hovde was on the Columbia staff with Kyle Smith, but it's been a while. You get some turnover there. You get the Caden Pierce news coming out that he's not going to play. You get Xavier Lee in the portal. You get a bunch of other players in the conference that aren't back, but a bunch of guys in the conference that are back. So I'm excited to talk about the conference and really see what happens this year.
Absolutely, and you mentioned it. There's not a lot of transfers in the Ivy League, but Penn picked up a unprecedented former top 50 recruit in TJ Power. Now, he did absolutely nothing over at Duke and Virginia last 2 years, but they pick him up along Fran McCaffrey, who they're going to have their main guy in Ethan Roberts back from last year, who was able to average about 17 points per contest. Around him, it's a little bit more of a mismatch. Michael Zannani was able to give you about 6.5 points per contest, was limited due to injury last year, and injuries did hurt the team quite a bit last year. Cam Thrower missed the entirety this season. He's back. How do you take a look at a Penn team that is now under the tutelage of old Fran McCaffrey?
Well, the first thing that you think about with a Fran McCaffrey team is that offense. They score a lot of points. Penn's problem the past few years has not necessarily been that they're not scoring. It's merely that they haven't been scoring quite enough for how bad the defense has been. And I still think that defensively, this roster kind of has some of the same drawbacks that you've seen over the past few years, but there should also be getting a different offense in there, play a little faster. Fran has gotten some up-tempo guys. The fact that guys like Ethan Roberts and AJ Levine were so excited to come back to Penn when Fran McCaffrey was hired as the new head coach kind of tells you that this is a system that players enjoy playing in. You mentioned TJ Power. TJ Power has upside in this league as a guy who's got size on the wing that can shoot the ball. He was a really, really good player in high school, but I wasn't the biggest fan of him coming out when he was going to Duke. I didn't think he did anything over the past couple of years. So I do think that he's definitely not close to living up to the recruiting billing, but certainly an ad in this league that can give you some production. There aren't a ton of guys in this conference that are that size that can move on the perimeter and kind of play on the perimeter the way Power does. But it also brings a little drawback because there aren't natural matchups from defensively, and we don't know how well he's going to scale on either end of the floor, but I think there's definitely room for TJ Power to be a big impact player. They also brought in JUCO transfer Lucas Lueth. I think that's how you say it. They have a whole bunch of other guys coming back on this roster, and a freshman class that's certainly fascinating. They brought in a 7-footer from Norway who could be an interesting piece in that front court if he is ready to contribute from day one. That gives them some rim protection that they have struggled for over the past few years. But yeah, this team offensively is going to be fun, especially with Roberts, because Roberts is going to be a first-team All-League player in the Ivy this year. He's going to score a ton. He's the fulcrum. He's going to be the fulcrum piece for this offense, and I'm really excited to see how he plays in a Fran McCaffrey system. There's still so many question marks around Penn. I don't know how to project this team. I could see them making the Ivy. I could definitely see them making Ivy Madness. I could also definitely see them missing it. I think there's a lot more fluidity in the league this year in terms of who's going to finish where.
Yep, I agree with you. And I think that Brown is a little bit of a question mark as well, because Keno Lilly has been the heart and soul piece for that team for the last few years. He's now gone, and he was one of the main guys for a team that was 360th in free throw shooting percentage. They're certainly going to need to work on that. They should be rock solid down low. You bring back Landon Lewis, who was able to average about 7 rebounds per game. AJ Lesbert is solid. I like Malcolm, Marisby, Jefferson as well. So, you've got solid pieces down low, but I think the big question becomes who steps up with Keno Lilly now out of the fold.
The key for Brown last year, we knew Keno Lilly being Keno Lilly, but they lose Nana Usuanane late before the season with an injury. It really did force Landon Lewis and Aaron Cooley to step up. Lewis really stepped up in a big way. Now it's his team at this point. He's just going into his senior year, was a much better player last year than he was the previous year. He improved his scoring average by 10 points a game. You don't really see that a ton. Going from 2 points to 13 points. I don't think he's got another jump like that in him, but this team is going to go where he takes them. You're not going to have the outlet of Keno Lilly is going to be able to score 18 points a game. He's going to make threes from the logo and bail out some possessions, but that also means that some possessions aren't going to end with a bad Keno Lilly shot. Maybe that ends up giving them more possessions to work the ball to Lewis. Maybe it ends up in a situation where they just don't have answers because Lilly was the answer on so many possessions. They're going to need a big season from Jeremiah Jenkins, who is their returning guard for them. He was a freshman last year. He's really slim, really skinny. I'm not sure if he's put on weight this offseason, but he's a guy that was not efficient at all in his minutes last year. They're going to need him to play a bunch. They did have some underclassmen that were interesting contributors last year off the bench. They had David Rochester and Famara Dabo. And as you mentioned, Risby Jefferson became a starter for them. There are returning pieces, but the question obviously does remain, with Lilly not there, will they be able to have enough answers on broken possessions, and will they be able to have a legitimate go-to perimeter option? We'll have to see if Lesbert becomes a go-to perimeter option. Great shooter. Didn't do a ton inside the arc last year. Didn't get to the line much. So if he's going to be that option, he's got to be better, stronger on the ball. But Brown definitely has another team that, if you told me they squeaked into Ivy Madness, I wouldn't be shocked. If you told me they didn't make it, I wouldn't be surprised either. I think the middle of the league has a lot of teams that like that this year.
Yep, absolutely. I think that it's such an interesting conference, especially the middle teams. As joining me on the show, we do have Sam Federman. He does great work over at Mid-Major Madness, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think this team is interesting, as well as Kevin Hovde. He comes on over from Florida, part of that national title winning coaching staff. And now he's over at a Columbia team where things were amazing for them. They start off 11-1. They knock off Villanova, and now they have to live life without Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa because his injury led to this team going down the toilet bowl. They won 1 out of their final 14 games. It was less than savory. How do you take a look at a Columbia team that brings back much of what wasn't Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa, like Blair Thompson and company, all going to be back for this team? Zanan Eddie Badri, hopefully I said that correctly, he's going to be back as well, but you lose that heart and soul piece, and we saw what it was last year when you didn't have Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa out there.
It was bad without Geronimo. Geronimo was awesome when he played, bringing in Kevin Hovde, getting some new opinions, new air, just a new formula for what Columbia is going to do. And the thing is, when you bring in a new coach in the Ivy League, he can't just come in and gut the roster and build his own roster immediately. So maybe they have some growing pains, Engels guys, with Hovde's system. Hovde, I spoke to Kevin Hovde at the Final Four about how he was going about building a year one roster and what his approach would be. He said that he was very impressed with the way that his initial conversations were received by the players who were there. I have no idea if that means this team is all of a sudden going to be really, really good. It probably doesn't. It's probably going to take some time because you got to get some of your own recruiting classes in there. And it's not to say that they don't have some good players coming back. I mean, Avery Brown, Blair Thompson, as you mentioned, Kenny Nolan, they all have certain things that they can do, but they haven't been part of winning basketball over the course of their careers. One guy who has been a part of winning basketball in New York City that they brought in, Hampton Sanders, D3 transfer from NYU. I think he's going to play an interesting role in this team's backcourt. Obviously, you do when you bring back Brown and Nolan. I don't know what that role looks like, but I think he's going to be a piece that Ivy League fans are going to need to know. Leland Coleman comes in from New Orleans, a solid season there last year. So you are able to bring in some transfers, not a ton. But for Columbia, it's not necessarily going to be, I don't think anyone's going to judge this season harshly if they don't make the tournament, because if they don't make Ivy Madness the way that it was kind of judged, the way that it felt like it was going to be judged last year. Obviously, they end up going 1-13. It was way worse than just not making Ivy Madness. But the fact of the matter for Columbia this coming year is it's a lot of Engels guys in Hovde's formula. That's going to be an interesting thing to watch, an interesting dynamic, because Hovde's been at Columbia before, but it's been a while, and he was part of successful Columbia teams with Kyle Smith as the head coach. And I do think that this was a really good, smart hire for Columbia, but I don't know if they're built to win in year one. I don't know if any new coach can come in and immediately thrive in the Ivy League the same way that you can thrive in other leagues in year one.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think that it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for Columbia this season. And for the longest time, it was a struggle for Dartmouth. Dartmouth was at or above 500 for the first time since 1998 and 1999 last year. And while Ryan Cornish is not back, having Brandon Mitchell-Day back is massive. Love his versatility. Jackson Monroe was relatively solid down low for the team as well. And Connor Edmondson, he was able to give the team 10.5 points per contest as a freshman. Really love his game. Obviously not going to be bringing in anything via the transfer portal, but really like this offense. And with Dartmouth, aside from Cornish, having a lot of those guys back, I don't think that this team is going to be going back to the same old Dartmouth team. I think that they might have turned a corner last year.
The key for Dartmouth, obviously, is that you're bringing back Mitchell-Day and Monroe. I mean, they were a really good defensive rebounding team last season, and those two guys were very important in that. Those two guys are great rebounders. They're good post presences to have at 6'8" and 6'8", both of them. Losing Cornish, losing Haskins, that means that it puts more pressure for ball handling on guys like Connor Amundsen, who last year was a terrific shooter. Cornish shouldered a lot of the ball handling and playmaking load for this team. So I wonder how Amundsen reacts to a stepped up role here in year two. Jaden Williams coming back as well. He'll see a stepped up role potentially because they're going to need more off the wing and more in the backcourt with losing Cornish and Haskins and how much they got from those guys. But yeah, I mean, it was a really, really good step forward for Dartmouth last year. The fact that they were able to go 8-6 in the Ivy League, make Ivy Madness for the first time. It now leaves Columbia as the only program who has never made Ivy Madness. So I think for Dartmouth, I don't know what the expectations are, but it definitely feels like there are expectations compared to where it has been over the past however many years because of what happened last year. And a lot of last year, there was a lot of three-point shooting variance. The three-point delta during that winning streak was pretty crazy for them. It helped them blow out teams. But yeah, they were blowing teams out. They blew out Harvard. They blew out Columbia. They blew out Cornell. They beat Princeton by 15. They blew out Brown. So it's not like they were squeaking by in a lot of these games. But it is worth mentioning that the three-point variance was pretty crazy. I do think that there is reason to be very optimistic for Dartmouth this year. As I said, the league feels kind of open in the middle, so would not be surprised if they climbed back, if they found their way back in to Ivy Madness. Also, probably worth mentioning, they lost an assistant, Rich Gleesman, who came in last year. He brought in a new offensive scheme for them last year in a way, and he left to be a head coach at Division III. So I wonder what's going to happen there. They probably will still find a way to do some or a lot of what he was preaching because it worked for them. And I think Dartmouth, there's definitely reasons to be optimistic for the Big Green this coming season.
Yep, there certainly is. And you mentioned it with Mitchell-Day coming back. That is absolutely massive for them, as we do have Sam Federman, who does such great work over at Mid-Major Madness, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think this team now has some of the bigger question marks that we're going to find in the league, because with Princeton, you thought that with getting Pierce back to the fold that things were going to be all well and good for them. Well, comes out that he's going to be trying to save that last year of eligibility, so they are not going to be having Caden Pierce, who was set to be their top scorer, returning back in the fold, which means that out of their top three scorers from a season ago, none of them return. That leaves Jackson Hickey along with Dalen Davis to really shoulder the load. They've brought in some nice freshmen. They've done a nice job of being able to bring these guys along, but this is a very young team out there in the Ivy League, and now they have to rely upon guys that are not used to being primary scorers to be primary scorers.
Nobody from this team that averaged more than 10 points a game is back. Dalen Davis is the only one back that averaged more than like 5.5. And Dalen Davis was not very good for a lot of Ivy League play. Kind of felt some pressure. He had a strong start to the season. He had some strong games in there. They're going to need him to be a lot more consistent if they're going to be good. They did have some success with lineups last year that didn't include Xavier Lee at times, most notably in the game against Yale at home, where Xavier Lee did not play in the last 8 minutes, and they almost made a comeback. I think it might have been more than just the last 8 minutes. They almost made a comeback to win that game. A big moment for getting guys on the floor. It was CJ Happy became a huge piece of the rotation after that game and in that game. And they're going to need him to have a big year as their post guy. Malik Abdullahi was on and off last year. Had some games where he wasn't a factor, wasn't in the rotation, but was not on the floor in a couple of the final games of the season. But Abdullahi was a freshman that I was excited about last year. I think that there is room for him to grow as well. Jackson Hickey had a solid season for kind of what we expected. He was not a piece really at all his freshman year. Became a piece last year, was part of that bench unit that got some more run during the end of the year, became a starter towards the end of the year for them. And then the other key piece that I didn't mention from that Yale near comeback was Jack Stanton. And Jack Stanton might need to be a big piece for Princeton this year. Didn't play a ton as a freshman. When he did, there were some good signs. Mentioned 17 points in 10 minutes in that Yale game. He can score, but we'll have to see what this team can get from a lot of different pieces. I am still not really sure how to evaluate Princeton right now because they didn't really play like you would expect the Princeton team to play last year. It was kind of just, all right, Xavier, all right, Caden, we're going to let you guys cook. And it came back to bite them. They were not the machine they were the previous year. Caden Pierce was playing hurt for a lot of Ivy League play. He was a lot less effective. Now he's redshirting and will not play for Princeton again, losing him, obviously. It's the whole thing that throws off the entire evaluation for Princeton right now. I don't think anyone truly knows what to expect from this team. Mitch Henderson has done a great job developing players through the years. It's definitely possible that we see some breakouts on this team and they're just fine. But I would definitely not be surprised if this were a year for Princeton that we're not exactly accustomed to, simply because they lose two guys that in typical Ivy League times would be back, that would be studs in Lee and Pierce. They do have some interesting recruits coming in, but again, with Princeton, this is a team that I'm sure they weren't blindsided by Pierce deciding to redshirt the year, but it certainly does feel like the fact that since they can't go into the portal and replace him, and they wouldn't have been able to anyway because of how late it happened, their roster, it doesn't look as pretty as it otherwise would have, and as we're used to it looking for the Tigers program, which has been excellent through the last however many dozens of years.
Yep, no question about it. It is going to be very much a new look team, but I do think that with Princeton, you always trust in the coaching staff with Mitch Henderson always doing a rock solid job out there. So it's going to be a very fascinating look for them. And this is a team in which I think that we know how they're going to look. For Yale, even though they are going to be losing John Polakidis from last season, what James Jones has built over there is an absolute machine. One of the most efficient offenses in all of college basketball last season. Defense was a little bit more suspect last year, but they returned so many of their great rebounders like Samson Elton, I think is going to be really good down low for this team. You also bring back a guy in Casey Simmons who began his career over at Northwestern. I just take a look at this Yale team, and I think that this is a team to beat out there in the Ivy League once again.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt that Yale is the favorite coming into this season. Even though you lose two all-Ivy players, you bring back Nick Townsend, who was all-Ivy last year, kind of a unique matchup guy at 6'7", can play the mid-post, can step out, gets to the line, makes passes, kind of a do-it-all type. When you have him next to Samson Alatan, it makes for a really formidable front court in this league. Alatan was a terrific rim protector, play finisher type for the Bulldogs last year. I wonder if he takes another step forward. But yeah, Casey Simmons took a step forward last year, and towards the end of the year was really rock solid. Gave them more scoring than what they're used to consistently towards the end of the year. That he did have some big games throughout the year, strung 4 10-point performances in his last 5 games. And he did have a stretch in the middle of the season where he was scoring in double digits a bunch. But this is a guy that I think with another year of seasoning in this system, another year of development, athletically, tools-wise, he's got everything it takes to be a stud for this team. And I think he's going to take a big step again for Yale. Isaac Celiscar, a bigger wing, a 6'6" sophomore, can get to the basket, gets to the line a ton. Wonder if there's a little more outside shooting element to his game this year, but I don't think he necessarily needs it to be a super effective player. He was very effective last year for Yale. Had some big games, had that big game winner against Penn. So really, there's a lot of guys on this team that I could see really being the best player on a given night. In the backcourt, Trevor Mullen's back, Riley Fox is back. Riley Fox is someone that I think will have a really fun career at Yale. Can shoot the ball, 6'6" guard. I wonder if there's more of a role for him now as that shooter in this system. Obviously, He's not going to be John Pulakidis, but he's a guy that can really shoot the ball. He's got good size as well. Was a freshman last year. Wonder if he takes another step. I think there's just guys that you can see taking another step on this team, and also guys that you know are going to be productive because they are productive players. And then there's also the factor that this is a team coached by James Jones. It's the Yale program. There's pieces returning. There's a lot to like about this Yale team. I think in terms of sure things in this league, Yale is the only one that I'm definitely confident saying is going to be in the mix the entire year. The clear favorite coming in. I really don't, about the other 7 teams, I just have no idea who's going to be really good, who's not. But Yale, I'm sure, is going to be really, really good.
Yep, I don't think that there's any question about it. This Yale team has just been consistently making the NCAA tournament. They have been the modicum of consistency for this conference. And at one point before Yale took over that mantle, that was Harvard. And Harvard over the last few years, just injuries upon injuries. Last year it was a little bit healthier for them, but they didn't quite have the roster that they were looking for last year. They were a little bit, shall we say, younger, but getting back Robert Hinton, who was able to average 14 plus points per contest, is big. Thomas Beatty's the second. He's back, double-figure scorer. Chandler Piggy, 13 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. The depth was a little bit suspect for them last year. They're going to have some freshmen coming in that I think should be able to help them out, but having that just fulcrum, the 4 of the top 5 scorers back from a season ago, I think is massive for them.
Austin Hunt and Rob Hinton, that was 2 of the better freshmen in the league last year. Obviously, Hinton was incredible. Hunt only played in 18 games, but when he did play, he was really good. Getting those 2 guys back in this era, even in the Ivy League, is not something that is the most common thing right now. So having super productive freshmen that come back, I mean, they had the previous year Malik Mack, super productive freshman, doesn't come back, but you get Robert Hinton back for another year, you get Austin Hunt back for another year. If Robert Hinton went out and won Ivy League Player of the Year, I don't think anyone would be surprised in the slightest. He was the leader in usage as a freshman. He's probably going to be the leader in usage again. If he could take another step forward, and he had some rough stretches in the middle of the year, but he really came on strong at the beginning, and he had some really good games towards the end. He was super good for them. Losing Evan Nelson, who was the point guard for this team, is certainly a loss, and Louis Lesmond as well was another important piece. But I do think they return more than most in terms of top level production. PJ, as you mentioned, kind of a strong wing, does a lot of his work, that can do work on both ends. Batiste, a guy that gives you a little bit of shooting, gives you a little bit of rim protection. Harvard hasn't made Ivy Madness. I don't know. I think it's since 2020. They haven't made Ivy Madness, but they do have a path there this year for sure. Well, actually 2020, there was no Ivy Madness, but they were in line to make Ivy Madness in 2020. Harvard is certainly in a position with the returning pieces to be in contention all year, to have a trip to Ivy Madness. And this is the most optimistic I've been about Harvard preseason in a couple of years for sure.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think that it is finally one of those cases where Harvard is starting to get things online and things are starting to trend northward for them. And we've got one last team to preview here on this Ivy League Conference Preview Edition, as we've got Sam Federman aboard right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that it's going to be an interesting year for Cornell, because I feel like they've got the fewest moving parts, because John Jaquez came over last offseason to replace old Mr. Earl, and he kept everything relatively in place. You've got A.K. Okereke and Nazir Williams out, but the likes of Jake Fegan, Cooper Norad and company, they're going to be back in the fold. And I think that's going to be a Cornell team where we know to expect with regards to the style. The question is, do they have the personnel to be able to carry out that style?
That's the question that we're definitely all asking right now. We know what it's going to look like. Do we know if it's going to work out? Because last year they lost 4 or 5 starters from their 2023 team, from the 2024 team, the Brian Earl's last team. You lose Gray, you lose rotation players, you lose Gray, you lose Boothby. They lost John Hansen, Chris Manione, but they brought back guys, and there were players ready to step up, and Fegan being one of them. Guy Ragland, Okereke became a bigger piece of the Mick puzzle last year. There isn't as much obvious retention. You lose a whole bunch of starters. You do bring back Cooper Nord at kind of the last minute. He entered the portal and then decided to come back. Jake Fegan comes back. But outside of that, there aren't a ton of guys that were on this team last year and productive throughout the year that are back in the fold for Cornell. And that's the question. Are they going to have the bodies to get through the season? Or are they going to have the quality of bodies to get through the season? Because this is a system, you need a lot of guys, and that you need the ability to go deep into your bench in a given game because of how much they press, because of how much they run. I'm definitely a little concerned about how much they're losing, but I would not be surprised because Cornell has also been one of those programs that is great developing players. If we saw a couple guys take steps forward, like a Baldwin or a Beckles or a Hinton. They also bring in a couple transfers. Marion Fishburne came from JUCO. They have a bunch of freshmen coming in. They had a bunch of freshmen last year that didn't play much that might see some more elevation in their roles this year. There are options. We don't know who is going to kind of step up around Nord and Fegan and kind of be the backbone for this team around them. I trust this staff to make this team competitive. John Shakes had a really solid first year. They go 18-11. They win the last 4 games of the regular season going into Ivy Madness. They give Yale a test in the final. They're going down big in that game. They came back and made it a game, but they lose so many pieces from that team, and there's not as much obvious continuation. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what happens for Cornell this season and who becomes the new pieces to step up.
Yep, I am very curious to see what we're going to be getting out of Cornell this season, and I know your work, Sam, it is second to none. You do such an amazing job over at Mid-Major Madness, taking a look at this great game of college basketball. Obviously, you're locked in with regards to Metro Atlantic and so much more, so let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, just follow at Sam_Federman on Twitter. That's where you'll find my stuff, brackets, bubbles, and bid stealers, trying to figure out what we're doing. Maybe do some more team previews in there, but honestly, we're in a spot where we're getting through the off season right now. My top 100 starts pretty soon because we're almost 100 days away from the season. I also just made my debut at Basket Under Review, Trilly Donovan's new website. Wrote a nice story on new IU Indy coach Ben Howlett. Certainly one that I would recommend. One of my favorites that I've written in a while. How fascinating his system and the system for the Jim Crutchfield system that is finally coming over to Division I with Howlett is, and I think that's worth reading at basketunderreview.com. And that's what I've got for you right now. Greg, thanks for having me on.
Yep, Sam does an incredible job gauging this great game of college basketball and did a great job of breaking down this conference. So big thanks to Sam for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VC Family Podcast. Coming next, it is that time podcast. They give you my projector or finish for the Ivy League.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to get Sam Federman aboard. He does such great work over at Mid-Major Madness. I know that he's going to be joining me most likely next week for the Metro Atlantic Conference Preview Edition as well. It just so happens that 2 of the main leagues that he covers fall sort of right around the same time, but he does an absolutely amazing job taking a look at this game of college basketball, lends such great insight on this fun league. So a big thanks to our good friend Sam for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the Ivy League. once again, because I am going to be doing a conference preview today, that means that any news and notes we saw in college basketball on Saturday, those are going to be polished up tomorrow, and any of the Twitter/X questions that I missed from yesterday, we're going to get those all polished up as well. So how about if we start with dead last in terms of my projected or finish? That is going to be Columbia. Even though Columbia has quite a bit returning from a season ago, it's a case where the big piece, Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa, he is no longer out there. And without Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa, well, you just don't have a lot for this team. They got off to a blistering 11-1 start with a win over Villanova. Lost 13 out of their 14 conference games. And I think that Kevin Hovde, who comes over from Florida, is a relatively solid coach, but I mean, this team was awful on defense. 335th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. 363rd in opponent's three-point shooting percentage. You do bring back 5 of the top 6 scorers from a season ago, but not that number 1 guy. Kenny Norland, he's able to give you about 12.5 points per contest. Avery Brown is able to give you 11 points in a steal per contest. I like Blair Thompson at 6'8" size, 8.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game, and Zanu Adini Bedri is able to give you a little bit of versatility as well. So, I mean, these guys are relatively solid, but outside their main 6 or 7 guys last year, they really didn't have a lot of depth as well. It's not like they went into the transfer portal and pulled out a lot of guys to be able to help out with that as well. So, I just think that it's going to take a little bit of time for Mr. Hovde to be able to get things online for Columbia. So, I did set them at number 8 in terms of my project or finish. At number 7, we're going to go with the Quakers of Penn. You do bring back top scorer Ethan Roberts, who was logging 17 points, 5.5 boards, 2 assists, shot 37% from 3, but TJ Power is a former consensus top 30 recruit. Now, did a nothing burger at Virginia, did a nothing burger at Duke, but you're able to bring in a guy that's 6'8", 6'9", that's able to light it up from three-point range the way that he's able to. That's big. And Fran McCaffrey, he knows how to coach offense. Iowa was in the top 33 in terms of points per possession each out of the last 8 seasons. You get back Cam Thrower, who was out last season due to injury. He was averaging about 5 points per contest 2 seasons ago. Michael Zanani, he was limited to 17 games last season, bit by the injury bug, but he was averaging about 6.5 points, shot 37% from three-point range. Not going to have a lot of size with this team, and Penn defense is going to leave something to be desired because while Frank McCaffrey does a great job of coaching offense, he doesn't do such a great job of coaching defense, but I think that Fran McCaffrey is a good enough to coach to be able to help Penn just not be completely in the cellar. So we are going to go sight unseen with Penn at number 7 in terms of my projector or finish. And now at number 6 in terms of my projector or finish, I think that's going to be a little bit of a rough year for Brown. For Brown, they do return quite a bit of the production from a season ago with Landon Lewis being able to give you 13.5 points, 6.5 boards, 1.6 blocks per contest, and AJ Lesbert was able to give you 10.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, but you're going to need to really have Michael Risby Jefferson step up in a big way. 2.5 assists, 5.5 points per contest, and Nafara Dabo, he was able to give you about 4.5 rebounds per game, but you do lose quite a bit of what you had down low from this team from a season ago, so there is going to be some question mark as to who's going to be able to pick up the slack from a Brown team that just felt like they were a little bit up and down last season as well. They had a little bit of a rough run of it towards the back half of conference play, and Keno Lilly was just a heart and soul piece for the team last few seasons. He and Aaron Cooley were just so rock solid for them. Having to move on from those 2 guys in the backcourt, I think is going to be a little bit rough, and I think that's going to be a bit difficult. So at number 6 in terms of my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Brown. This is blasphemous, but at number 5, I'm going to be going with Princeton. For Princeton, not having Caden Pierce out there, I think is going to be really costly for this team because you knew that you were going to be losing Xavier Lee. He's heading on over to the SEC, but with Pierce pretty much redshirting this year and saving his eligibility to be able to play elsewhere, that means that your top 3 scorers from last year are gone. That means that you have to rely upon Dalen Davis, who's a solid player. He's able to give you about 9.2 points per contest. He was a nice, shall we say, a part-time starter for them. Started 20 out of the 30 games last season, shot 35% from three-point range, but I mean, really, other than Peyton Seals, there was nobody else on the roster outside those main 3 guys that shot above 35% from three-point range last season. This is a unit that they always do a great job of not allowing teams to get second and third chances, but they themselves don't generate a lot of second and third chances of their own. They're really going to need some of these guys like a Malik Abdul to be able to take some steps up. CJ Happy, well, he had 6'9", is able to give you a better versatility as well, but I do have some big-time question marks. It's a lot to lose in an offseason, and this is a pretty pretty loaded Ivy League. So I did set Princeton at number 5 in terms of my projector finish. At number 4, I think that Dartmouth finally has the ball rolling. For Dartmouth, they go 8-6 in conference last year. Recognize that they do lose one of their main guards in Ryan Cornish, but you're bringing back Brandon Mitchell-Day, 13.5 points, 7.5 boards, just under 3 assists per contest, all sorts of versatility there. Connor Edmondson, he was really good for the team, shooting 44.7% from 3 as a freshman, 10.5 points per contest. I really like what these guys are able to bring to the table. You do have Kate Haskins leave via the transfer portal, but this was a pretty deep team last season. They were able to go very comfortably 7 or so deep. Jaden Williams is someone that is able to give you a bit of 3-point shooting. He's able to throw in there about 3 or so rebounds per game. You've got Jackson Munero, who's able to give you 5.5 boards per contest as well. Just such good, clean offense. The Dartmouth team, they're not going to generate a lot of turnovers, but they're also not going to put you on the free throw line as well. Very good with their 3-point shooting defense as well. I like this Dartmouth team to be able to head back to the Ivy League tournament. I've got them number 4 with regards to my projector finish. At number 3, I finally think that things get back online for Harvard. Harvard was the creme de la creme team in the Ivy League for such a long time. For Harvard, tough times to say the least for Tommy Amaker over the last few years. Injuries upon injuries upon injuries. Last year it wasn't as much of that, but you know what? Now you've got a base that is returning as a whole. The top 3 scorers, Robert Hidden, Thomas Beatties II, along with Chandler Piggy. These guys are all back. Between these 3 guys, you're able to get a little bit over 38.5 points per contest. Baddies was able to shoot about 38% from 3-point range, threw in their 5 rebounds per game. This is a Harvard team that I do think that they're going to be able to do a pretty rock solid job down low. They were killed by the fact that they weren't able to grab second and third chances last season, and this is a unit that they did do an okay job in terms of being able to cut things off from the perimeter, but they were very much gashed down low. I think that they're going to be a little bit better on this front. I do think that for this Harvard team, you're going to be able to have Austin Hunt be able to take some nice steps forward as well. 3.5 boards, right around about 8 points per game as a true freshman last year. So he's a guy that I think has a little bit of upside. You've also got a little bit of upside with a guy from Australia, Luca Ace-Nakesti, who he didn't see a lot of minutes last year, but I think that they're going to be calling upon him for a little bit more. A lot of size around the perimeter. A lot of guys are right around 6'4" to 6'6". If you can have Ace-Nakesti be able to step up for the team, I think that they're going to be in very good shape. I've got Harvard at number 3 in terms of my projector finish. At number 2, I do like Cornell. For Cornell, they did a nice job of transferring things on over from Coach Earl and being able to have one of the guys that played in the Sweet 16 for Cornell many years ago, and John Jaquez, I thought was a really nice show. He say flip. Now you do lose a pair of guys in Ike Okereke along with Nazir Williams, but you know what you're going to be able to get out of Jake Fegan and Cooper Nora. These 2 guys were able to combine for about 21 points per contest. You're going to be able to retain a lot of these other ancillary guys like an Adam Song Hinton, who's able to give you about 4.5 points per game. Obviously not a team that's really hitting the transfer portal aggressively, but this team, year in and year out, they're just really good with the clean flowing offense that you get. Number 1 in the country in terms of 2-point shooting percentage. Once again, last season, they do bring in a transfer in Casper Sepp. He should be able to help the team out a little bit more down low. Last year, they were 286th in the country in terms of offensive rebound percentage. Sepp was over at Valparaiso, averaging about 5.5 rebounds per game. That should be able to give this team the, shall we say, a little bit more rough and tumble down low that they need to be able to take some strides forward. I do think that they do so. I am very much a believer in this system. They've gotten things rolling. Jacob Bacelis, he's able to give you a pair of assists per contest. He should be able to help take the load off of Norred along with Fegan in the backcourt. I do think that Cornell just keeps on reloading. Number 2, my projector finish, going to be going with Cornell. And at number 1, shock, surprise. We're going to go with Yale once again. This Yale team has just been a machine out there in the Ivy League. 13-1 in conference play last season. I recognize that you lose John Polakidis. That's an issue, but Nick Townsend, 15 points, 7 boards, 3.5 assists at 6'7". He's back in the fold. He shot 48% from 3-point range. Casey Simmons, who began his career over at Northwestern, has another year of eligibility. 9 points on 35% 3-point shooting. Isaac Kelliskar, he's able to give you some nice production. 7 points, 5 rebounds per game. This team really picked it up on the defensive side of things towards the back half of the season after the first half of the season, well, it was a little bit less than savory for them. So that was a bit of an issue. But I mean, this team just does such a good job of being able to take a look at things, to be able to make sure that they're able to maintain their system, to know that they've got really good offense, but at the same time, they're going to do a nice job on defense as well. It took them a little bit of time to be able to get that defense last season, but even a guy like a Jack Sullivan who comes in at 6'10", you should be able to give them quite a bit of production. They don't really look to a lot of transfers in general. You've got one or two guys that come in from other places, but Samson Alatin, I think, is going to be able to take some nice steps forward as a year number 3 big man at 6'10". I think that he's going to be rock solid. Lots of versatility. Riley Fox is a guy that I'm relatively high on as well, and I'm just a believer in the Coach Jones system in general. This man, year in and year out, he gets the most out of his players. He gets the job done. And I think that he's going to be able to do so once again. I expect this to be another James Jones, shall we say, NCAA tournament run. If you throw in there James Earl Jones, that's a man that was over there at Star Wars. And I do think that it's going to be Revenge of the Bulldogs. Number 1 in terms of my projector or finish, we are going with Yale. And that'll wrap things up for the Ivy League Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. A big thanks to our good friend Sam Federman, who does great work over at Mid-Major Madness, for joining me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters UM, the me does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.